morning, everyone. My name is Daryl Tippy. Actually, it's Colonel Retired Daryl Tippy. I'm a retired Army Colonel. I am now with NIST MEP, with TMAC of the NIST MEP. Just to give you a little brief history, NIST MEP falls under the Department of Commerce. They partner up with institutions like our host institution is University of Texas Arlington. And the intent is they recruit people that are experts in various different forms of industry to help small to medium-sized companies overcome a wide range of problems. It could be anywhere from what we're talking about today, cybersecurity, it could be quality, logistics, it could help streamline processes, we can help with cash flow, we can help with a lot of different things. Now, TMAC is a not-for-profit organization. Its goal is to grow the economy of whichever state it's in. TMAC is associated with Texas. There's 51 MEPs across all U.S. states and territories, and that's an excellent resource for cybersecurity, but also for any other business problems and other things that you might have. The way TMAC's organized, Texas is a big state, so we got 8 regions. I lead the cybersecurity effort for the state of Texas. I also am regional support from NIST MEP for the surrounding states. Things to keep in mind. Give me just a second. Excuse me, I had to clear my throat. Things to keep in mind, we're here to try to help you meet DoD requirements. It's absolutely essential that we're able to tighten up the security of the DIB. The reason behind that, I mean, besides being a congressional law and, it was mandated that way, the reason it was mandated that way, where there were several weapon systems that essentially the designs and information were stolen, if you go through the history, and that can't continue to happen. Otherwise, when I was actually out in combat zones and stuff, our men and women in service will not have that overwhelming advantage that we were able to have when we were in combat, so that we were able to get into a conflict and get it over with quick. A couple of other additional things I want to mention is I happen to be on the National NIST Cyber MEP working group, as well as the steering committee. Enough about me. We're here right now today to talk about Max Aulick. I group Max in a group of about 20 individuals I know across the country that I consider as a true expert on CMMC, on DFARS, and other things. And he has some very interesting experiences to share with you, as well as some learnings and other things that I'm most confident that you will take a lot of good information and ideas away from this webinar. I'm going to turn it over now to Max, unless you've got anything to add.
This is good, Daryl. Thank you so much. And everyone that's logged in, thank you so much for attending. We're very thankful for TMAC and Daryl, just partnership, just to educate the defense industrial base. So, today we'll get into the agenda, but just as a quick background, I started my career in the U.S. Air Force as a security leader. So a lot of what I'm going to present to you is from the perspective of what the government generally wants to see. So if you're a small business, today we're a small business and we're looking at it from the other side. And so really we work with a lot of different machine shops, a lot of different executives who are manufacturing executives. They're really good at what they do. But when it comes to technology and IT and cyber, it's really difficult for them. So what I encourage you to do is just ask any questions. It doesn't matter what question you have, please ask, because we ourselves have to go through the same kind of painful process that you're most likely gonna have to go through. So started my career in the Air Force, spent a lot of time in the Middle East, got back from the Middle East, was trained as a security professional, then a linguist, and then basically started working with larger primes, larger defense industrial base. And then over the years, we managed to help out a lot of small businesses, but also in other verticals, financial services, healthcare, those kinds of things. So that's just a quick backdrop about my experience. And you know, as with many other cybersecurity leaders, you got to have a lot of credentials. You got to have all of these acronyms behind your name. But I have had a lot of experience working with a lot of different agencies, and our goal is really to help you understand when they're looking at contracts, what are they thinking about when they think about small businesses. So today, what we really want to talk about is, you know, we've been hearing about CMMC 1.0, NIST 171, and all of these other you know, terminologies that's been thrown out there for the last 5 years. So today we want to talk about what should you worry about as a small business, because not everything matters, right? There's very few key things that are going to impact your business. We'll talk about what has changed, what has not changed, and I also want to share my experience as an auditor, but also going through the audit process right now to get credentialed as an auditor. What is that like? And what are some of those key takeaways, lessons learned that you can apply to your business that are going to be very important, because auditors like our company and any other auditor, they're going to be looking for those same kinds of things in your business. So I encourage you to ask any questions. We will go up until about 11:30, 11:40 Eastern Standard Time. And then after that, we'll open it up for questions. But I've got the chat box open here. So in the middle of this, you can ask any questions, and I'll try to be a little bit collaborative and answer any of those questions. So today, overall, what is the status of the defense industrial base? Have we matured? Have we not matured? What's impacting in consideration of the Ukraine thing that's happening, and also just in general, what has happened since Corona, and then after that, we'll get into the specifics of CMMC 2.0. This is where it'll get a little bit technical. So all the slides will be available to you. So I'm not going to read off the slides, but there's a lot of technical content, and you can have copies of these slides. And then if you're one of the few businesses that has been pretty proactive, and you're like, you know, I've spent a lot of time, I've spent a lot of money, I already know a lot of this stuff, I've been tracking it, now I need to prepare for the audit. What are some of the key things you can do to start preparing for the audit? And then of course, Q&A, important links. We'll send all of this contact information out to you as well. So that's a little bit of the tactical agenda that we're going to be covering today. So let's start with kind of the overall health from the defense industrial base. So there's an association called NDIA, or National Defense Industrial Association. It's basically all of the primes that work directly with the government. And this association's been around for the last 50 years. They generally report up to the government directly, to the senators and different bodies of the Department of Defense. And they collect a lot of information and start to report it back up. And these are some of their findings, right? So there's a lot of supply chain issues just because of the pandemic. So it has nothing to do with cyber, but just because of pandemic, a lot of businesses are hurting, right? In terms of there's more work, but they can't get enough supplies, right? So demand for the material, raw material, but also goods have increased. And of course, the budgets to deliver on those things have increased as well. But overall, we're finding that we're not able to get materials out. And the other part is the industrial security. This is not cybersecurity, but more of the clearances, contract. That's all what the government means when it comes to industrial security. This remains to be one of our highest concerns in the United States. Who are we doing contracting with? What is our supply chain? Who are they outsourcing the work to? Those things are very unclear to the government. And that remains to be like an area of a huge concern. And then of course, our competition, right? From a state perspective, Chinese, Russian, right? They are increasing in all sorts of different areas, right? everything from machine learning, artificial intelligence, to things like what we call advanced manufacturing, precision kind of shops, those kinds of things. So there's a lot of increase in competition, which also worries the U.S. government if we're going to be able to sustain our national just national position in the world, right? And then of course what the government calls readiness capabilities. Are we ready for any kind of war or pandemic or any kind of negative event to our country, whether supply chain based, food? There's a sense that those capabilities are declining, and all of this pressure is really what's reporting into the defense industrial base health. So these are some things for you to consider, in terms of the demand, the supply chain, industrial security. As you can see, there's some year-over-year stats, and this is kind of what the government looks at in order to make a determination how much pressure to apply and what regulatory mechanisms are available to help the market, right? I say the word help, but sometimes it can really not help the small businesses, right? So as you can see from anything from production inputs to innovation, all that is on the decline, which ultimately means that it's going to cost more to the government, and the government is worried about how do we address these kinds of issues. And then of course you can see the political and regulatory, right? We didn't really see much changes, but this is where you could say that the overall health is not very good of the defense industrial base, and the government's job is try to figure out how to fix this, right? So TMAC plays a key role in that. It's not just about cybersecurity. You have to take a holistic view of the business, but cybersecurity is key part of this because obviously to fix our security issues, increase the competition, the going trend is how do we help the small businesses that are here? How do we secure them so they can do a little bit more work? So that's from the strategic perspective. Now let's get into CMMC 2.0, because all of these strategic areas inform how the government should go about pressing on, or maybe they shouldn't press on. Maybe they should just, ignore CMMC and let it go. Most likely not the case, but a lot of times they are supposed to, look at some of these other factors, other constraints on a small business in order to develop the rule properly. So CMMC 2.0, if you have been involved, this slide will bore you. But I'm gonna go through it very quickly. So essentially, right, this 254.20 clause has been around since 2012, right? So it's called 7012. The last two numbers talk about the year that it came out, right? So it's been around since 2012. Nobody really paid attention to it, which is fine. Then came all of a sudden the CMMC 1.0. And the DoD formed an AB accreditation body, which you most likely have been following. And then after that, there's basically a desire to enhance the cybersecurity of non-classified information called CUI, and there was an intent to how do we monitor the defense industrial base? That was the intent. Very difficult to monitor private small businesses, right? You have the right to your privacy, but then all of a sudden they want to figure out how to do monitoring, right? So that's a brief history. As we fast forward, at first it was this CUI kind of information that they cared for. Now what we're starting to hear is not just CUI, but we also care for FCI, federal contract information. So as we're going through our audit journey, they want to understand both. Are there federal contracts that you have that are not public knowledge, right? Obviously, if it's public knowledge, if it's on sam.gov and just very open, those are not the things that the government cares for. So if you're receiving contracts from your prime that are not public knowledge, and they're not supposed to be public knowledge, all of that information is called FCI, federal contract information. And obviously there's this huge category of information called CUI. You'll start to hear this more. You'll also start to hear about rolling up previously labeled information such as ITAR or distribution A, B, C. Oh, these are called distribution statements. A lot of those statements and ITAR information may or may not get rolled up into CUI and other forms of classifications that we're supposed to be protecting, right? So really, they really hone in on, hey, how is the CUI coming into your organization and flowing throughout your organization? How are you maintaining positive control of this information? It's important to know both, right? Because you can apply different amount of work to FCI, and then different amount of work, you might have to apply a lot more security to CUI. So if you're a job shop and you're not really getting design specs and things like that, you may not even have CUI. You may only have FCI. But if you are a design shop that is receiving specifications and you have ITAR information, you're probably getting both of those kinds of information. So it's very important to know and understand how this information is classified. You have some latitude on how it's classified through writing your own policies called data classification policies, but it's a very important topic. The other thing that you absolutely must understand is the nuance in language. And I call all of this technocratic because it's like technology people, right, writing bureaucratic rules. But before we were looking at really these 5 levels with practices and maturity levels, those kinds of things. What you need to understand is nothing really has changed. The government has gone from 156 practices or control objectives is what NIST calls them, down to 130, right? So they've cut out a lot of information that was proposed by the accreditation body that might be form of overregulation. And they have said, okay, just go back to kind of a level 1 through level 3, and everything that is inside of level 3, put it in level 4, right? So you need to understand that these levels have gone away, and the government has simplified the model for us, which is actually very good, because when this first came out, a lot of people were preparing for level 3, and we had no clarity on what level 4 and 5 even mean, right? So today, level 3 is really going to be for bigger companies with more sensitive information, and it's going to be driven by contract. Most organization will fall within this level 2 area. So let's talk about this, how this will work. So level 1 is foundational, right? If you have federal contract information, that could be if you're a business that does work with the government, but you're really selling over a credit card, or you're just basically receiving small jobs. You only have to do about 17 different practices, and you can self-assess. You don't need a third party. You don't need to be talking to anybody. You can actually self-assess, which actually can save you a lot of money. You just have to make sure that a senior officer in your company is signing off on that. Level 2 is where most of small businesses are going to fall, especially if you are getting more than 20, 30, or 10% of your business is coming from the DoD. You should prepare for this, not only because it's required, but also it's good business, because if you don't have this, you may not be able to get more business. So you have to make a decision based on, okay, well, I don't have the CUI data, but if you don't have the level 2 certificate, you may not even be in the game, right? Your business may not be able to grow. So you have to make decisions based on 2 factors. One is, do I have the information? And the other is, do I have the desire to continue to grow in the defense industrial base? Here you'll see 2 lines. It says CUI prioritize acquisition, and then it says non-CUI prioritize acquisition. The original thought was that the government will tell small businesses or the primes who actually needs to get level 2 certified. But what it's coming out to be is that most likely the contracting officers are going to have a giant contract, like $1 billion contract, and then they will say, hey, this whole contract needs to be at level 2. And that's the easiest way to do this for them, because it's hard for them to say, well, that small business is only getting, you know, $100,000 worth of work, and they don't need to be at level 2. Some of that is going to flow down from your prime. So I would prepare for level 2, even though there's might be a bifurcation. You may not need to do it, but if you're working with primes, they're most likely going to say, yes, go ahead and do this. And if you don't do it, they might select somebody else who has already moved forward. So it's a business advantage for you to start thinking about level 2.
Hey, Max. Yeah, this is Daryl. One of the things I've been seeing a lot of lately is, you know, there are businesses that probably would be considered doing COTS off the shelf type stuff. And in an abundance of caution, that contracting officers, you know, requiring them to meet the interim rule to be at level 3 protection, because I don't, you know the exact reason. I think they're not comfortable saying that they are COTS and only need to be level 1. So they're, you know, an abundance of caution, they're pushing them up to a higher level.
Yep. So Daryl, that's a great point, sir. If you, there's a government terminology called COTS, commercial off the shelf, right? So if your product, what you're building, falls within that category, and that's a legal term, right? We could say that, hey, we're a job shop and what we build is a COTS thing. It's not a custom thing, right? Because we just add a few more COTS product to it and it's all COTS. So you have to properly classify what you're doing, and you might be able to push the government back a little bit and say, hey, this product is almost like buying a pencil off of Walmart and we don't need protection. So it's really, really important. You know, it's really important to understand if you fall within the COTS area or not. And these slides are a little bit, you know, you could say a little bit outdated. Somebody messaged me, Jeff, thank you so much. This bifurcation, this was the original thought to help the small businesses, you know, lay off the pressure a little bit. Even if you're level 2, you may not be able to. But the reality is, if you're going to be at level 2, this bifurcation may not exist, and you are most likely going to have to do all of the 110 controls, and that's still based off of NIST 171. So whoever chimed in, I appreciate that, and Jeff or Daryl, thank you so much for adding. Absolutely, Jeff, thank you so much, sir. So that's kind of important for you to know. The other things that, you know, that's very much important is that, you know, it really gets, when we start to go over to CMMC 2.0, the accreditation body had additional 20 requirements or so, roughly speaking. They have removed that. What that really means is that you know, they're trying to line up with NIST, which is the standards organization that develops all of these things. If NIST is not involved and the CMMC AB is doing this, it's going to be very difficult for them to maintain the standard. So the AB is actually right now working with NIST, trying to insert in those additional 20 rules. But that's a very different, you know, different process. If you want to know absolutely what you must be doing, follow the NIST 171 security practices, and you'll be well ahead of the game. If you're one of the few companies that has a DD 254 contract, which means that you're doing something in the classified area, you hold a facility clearance, and you have heavy ITAR, and you're working directly with the government doing some sensitive work, you may receive a contract in the future for level 3. But if you don't fall in those categories, start to work on level 2, and that's most likely where you're going to stay. If you're working in advanced security and other items, you most likely already have some of these rules implemented, but there's another practice called 800-172 security practices, and it totally builds on what you're already supposed to be doing. But for the most part, the defense industrial base should worry about level 2. Level 3, we have not heard much conversation about it, except that it's for companies that need a little bit more tighter security. And we haven't really seen anything about this as of right now.
Hey, Max, I happen to have sources, I'll just put it that way. But what I'm being told is everybody has to be level 2 first. Then once they've achieved level 2, they'll tell who needs to be level 3.
That's a good point, Daryl, because even for us, as we're going through the audit process to become C3PAO, which we're on the tail end of it, we are expected to be at level 2 to audit level 2 agencies or organizations seeking certification. And then eventually, though some of our customers, a lot of our customers fall within this area of classified computing, they're requesting us to push them towards level 3. We're not able to push them. We're still waiting on level 3. And you're right, the government will generally tell you, hey, this is what you need to do. So, so some of the facilities, they do receive it, right? They start to receive this indication. A lot of weapons manufacturers, they will receive this indication, hey, you need to be at level 3. We've seen that. So most of the defense industrial base is really going to be worried about, well, how do I get past level 1 and level 2? Can I be level 1? Can I stay at level 1? So what we want to provide you is, okay, if you're going to be at level 1, what should you worry about? And then of course, level 2, how does that differ? That's very important. The number one thing that you should really think about before you go to the audit is something called a scoping guide, right? So just because you have a company with 5 people or 100 people, it doesn't matter. What you really have to determine is the scope. What is part of inspection and what is not part of inspection? Your organization could be set up in a way where you can separate things very easily. And that separation is very important because that's going to protect you from an audit perspective. You don't need to be audited in 100 different areas or your entire business, right? So for level 1, there's something called FCI assets, and that's federal contract information. If you're processing, storing, and transmitting FCI, what this really just comes down to is if you have a contract that it's not public knowledge, it's most likely going to hit your ERP system, right? Because you're a job shop or you're some kind of shop, you got to send an invoice, you got to receive the work, and it's most likely going to hit your ERP system, right? I'm just making that as an assumption because we come across this a lot. So you have to figure out, where do the contracts go? And only the contracts that require this additional level of protection. It's not just any contract. There are very specific contracts. And then those assets, we call assets as an IT terminology, like servers and computing resources and software, right? People, those particular assets need to be protected against the 17 to 19 practices. I'm forgetting the number, but it's less than 20, right? And what the government considers an asset is people, technology, so any servers, routers, right? Facility, a building, and any kind of external provider. So let's say if we're working with you, we're an external provider, and if we're accessing any of this information, it actually flows down to us. We're responsible too, which we'll talk about, how you should handle external providers in a minute. So that's level 1 scoping guidance. It's very particular to FCI, which is actually a lot lighter weight. You can take all of the contracts, really figure out which ones are public knowledge, which ones are not public knowledge. Ones that are not public knowledge, you need to draw kind of a circle around that or a boundary around it and say, this is where that information lives. This is where it flows. And you can even downgrade that information if you want to, and really lock in that scope. The more you can lock in, hey, where the FCI flows, that's really gonna help you de-scope things. The other thing with level 1 is you can self-do this. You don't really need any third party to help you, although it's very helpful to get a third party in, but you don't actually need it per the rules. You can self-attest, and as long as that is signed off by a senior officer, which is usually somebody that has an ownership and a stake in the business, right? Now, here's the level 2. Now, a lot of companies are going to fall in this if you are receiving CUI, obviously, but even if you're not receiving CUI and you want to grow in the defense industrial base, and as Daryl mentioned earlier, you might have a COTS product, right? And you're like, well, I just have this widget and anybody can buy it. I don't understand why I need to do a level 2 assessment, right? Technically, you may not need to, but your competition might be building that same widget but not as COTS. And they're able to sell it to the Booz Allens or the whoever of the world, right? And it's all about competition, right? The primes don't have access to your SPRS score. All they're looking at is, well, who's got the certificate and who does not have the certificate, right? So you could make the argument, well, we're a COTS product. Well, your primes are getting graded on who's got the best supply chain, and they're going to go with whoever has the certificate, almost like a quality certificate, right? So somebody else might outbid you based on, hey, we can build this product as a custom product, even though it's available on the COTS market, right? You could be cheaper, you could be better quality, but if you don't have that certificate, even if you're COTS, you could be handing some work over to the business. So you have to have this business hat on when you make a decision like this, not just, hey, do I get the CUI or not, right? Because a lot of businesses are gonna fall into this.
Hey, Max, there's another alternative here too, which is something to consider. You got a product that you think is COTS, and they're trying to push you up to level 2 CMMC 2.0. It's possible to get with like a provisional assessor or something of that nature and get what's referred to as a determination statement. And if you can show from a certified assessor that this is actually COTS or whatever the case may be, then they would look at you as a better alternative, because that basically checks the box for DoD that they had provided adequate security. It's just, it's an investment that you make into your product. It might cost you $3,000 to $5,000 or something of that nature. But what it would say is this product is truly commercial off the shelf, and it only requires level 1 protection.
Yep. So Daryl, that's a good point. What we say is we don't want to be in a pre-audit state and do that. We actually have a legal advisory component, an actual prior JAG that works with us, because we don't want to offer an audit opinion. We want to offer a legal opinion, right? Because I'm not an attorney, but let's just say one of your primes said, well, we disagree with that determination, right? You have to point it back to the legal authorities, and somebody must stand up for what you believe, which is, hey, our product is COTS and it's according to these DFAR rules. A paralegal could do this work, a cyber auditor could do this work, but what we feel like is the safest bet is where you get a professional legal opinion, and that's something that we offer as part of how we believe that a pre-audit should work. But Daryl, that's absolutely correct, sir. We have a lot of companies that have came to us and that have asked us for a determination statement, and then they can separate the business decision from the reality of what needs to be certified and what does not need to be certified. So let's talk about, right, this level 2 assets, right? So we have level 1 assets, which are kind of this high level of people, technology, facilities. What are the level 2 assets if you're like, well, I know I'm going to need this. It doesn't matter if I'm COTS or not. We're just going to want to grow in this business. What are these, these assets? One is the CUI itself. It's the data. It's the information itself, right? And that could be in any form: paper, verbalized. It could be printed out. It could be on digital format, right? It could be on a billboard, protected, right? It's just the CUI information itself. The second is what they call kind of security protection assets. So these are all the firewalls and authentication schemes, the 2-factor, all of the technical gear is what I call what you might need. We consider that a security protection asset, right? What's guarding, the gate guards, the dogs, and those kinds of things, but in a digital sense, right? Which is usually firewalls of some sort, encryption of some sort, 2-factor authentication. These are your security protection assets. And then there's, something called contractor risk managed area. This is a new terminology, but essentially, if anything is being managed by a contractor, you're supposed to flow down the rules to them. If you're working with an IT company and they're managing, they're not part of your assessment, they're going to be part of a separate assessment. And then, of course, they made a generic category called specialized assets. And you could throw whatever you want in there, but they put things like Internet of Things, IoT. It's a fancy term for machines, right? So in the future, they might define that a little bit more. They might say, well, it's not IoT. They might come up with another word, industrial automation or machine shop automation, right? But a lot of these things are not part of the CMMC assessment for now, because even though they have CUI going through them, that's how you might cut different parts. For now, for this iteration of CMMC, they're not part of it, but in the future, we can expect them to be part of it. So all of these things are supposed to be part of your, what we call a boundary, your assets, and you're supposed to only protect these assets, right? The tighter you can get your assets list, right, the better your SSP is going to be, which is a security plan and the documentation. That's what's most important, is how you describe what you're protecting. The actual security protection assets, the firewalls, hate to say this, those become lesser important because you can have mitigations for almost everything, right? You can say, hey, we don't need encryption because nobody has access to it and it's completely disconnected, right? As a security officer and assurance officer inside of the US government, you have so many different types of systems, at a much higher level classification. And you can actually justify in your SSP the way you articulate. And that's what the government wants. They want you to provide assurance and confidence that, yes, you may not have all the technical things in place, but you're managing your risk properly. And if you're not managing your risk properly, then it'll show it, right? It doesn't matter how many security protection assets you have. It doesn't matter how many contractors and how many subcontractors are helping you. It's really, really important that you provide them assurance, and that really comes through articulating in your SSP and having that asset inventory mapped out completely. So we've got about 5 more minutes, or 5 to 10 more minutes. And then we'll talk about a few other key things that are very important. So right now, we're going through this very painful DCMA prep audit. And, even as a company that does this day in and day out, even for a company like us, scope management, I don't want to say reduction, but management and reducing it to reasonable level and keeping the word reasonable in there is appropriate for us. If I said to my staff that, hey, we're a cyber company, we can handle anything and just include everything in the scope, it would be disastrous. So it's very important that you work to reduce your scope constantly. And what that means is you control the CUI and maybe declassify it, right? So there's 2 techniques to do that, primarily for this level of security. There's usually 3 techniques if you're in the classified area. Human separation is a third, but that's not applicable here. So logical separation is anything that you use a computer for, right? You can say, hey, I'm going to throw a firewall here. I'm going to throw a virtual network here, or I'm going to software define this and throw it in the cloud. You can do those kinds of solutions. Those are good solutions. Those are good ways to think about it. The obvious other is, hey, we have federal contracts, but only our manufacturing shop in Texas, at the Dallas location, that's the only location that does any government work, but the location in Montana, right, that doesn't do any government work, right? So the concept is that you can have different lines of businesses, you can have different facilities, and then within those facilities, obviously you can have badge access and things like that, right? So that's called physical access, right? So the more you can reduce your scope using these 2 things and balancing these 2 things, it'll help you tighten up your assessment. So you can have FCI and CUI in the same area, right? You have to make some of these determinations. You can say, hey, I've got contracts that go into my ERP system. I don't know if they're sensitive or not, but I definitely get CUI, and you can just package those up together, right? You don't need to be splitting hair, because in cyber, we tend to make things a little bit more complex than they need to be. You can just simply say, hey, it's all single scope. It's all under the same policy if it's easier for you. And if you do that, just, try to shoot for the higher level. this kind of decision, you're going to need to split hair if you're thinking about level 1 when you should be level 2, and your business leadership is like, I don't want to go to level 2, right? You'll need to split some hairs and justify there. The other thing to kind of consider that's very important is, most small businesses today, they don't have IT teams, they don't have cyber teams, they don't have lawyers, right? We're a cyber company and we don't even have those things, right? So any external service provider, make sure you're developing, in the technical term is inheritability matrix or responsibility matrix. What are you getting from them and what are they getting from you? Generally, we'll see a very, very broad contract, like, yeah, they're my IT guy or gal, right? But that IT person has access to potentially hundreds of other businesses just like yours. And what the government and the auditors understand is, I don't need to attack you. I just need to attack the IT person. And that IT person has access to hundreds of other small businesses. And so now we can get to hundreds of other small businesses. This kind of attack actually happens. So from your standpoint as a small business, make sure your contracts are solid. Make sure that there's a clear responsibility matrix. Hey, out of all the requirements, IT, this is what you're responsible for. This is what assurance is responsible for, and this is what management is responsible for. If you do that, you'll be fine. A lot of times these things are already happening, but they're never written down. And if it's not written down, nobody will believe you, right? The auditor cannot take your word for it. They have to examine something. So it's very important that you implement this concept of separation of duties, that my IT team, my single CMMC team is doing everything. That most likely will not fly, because you can't, just like financial rules, you can't have somebody cooking the books, right? Like you somehow need to check it, and that's done through separation of duties. So make sure you have some of those service level agreements, good contracts, and of course a responsibility matrix in place with your current IT team that protects you, and it also protects them.
Hey, Max, one thing to add to that list potentially when they're putting that matrix together is make sure it's a U.S. owned company. There are several companies out there available that could provide those services for you that ultimately might be owned by Russia or China.
Good call out. We actually had a U.S. owned company as an IT, and then they had hired an intern, and the intern was from Southeast Asia, right? And they were managing an ITAR area. So whenever you can generally tell if it's a U.S. owned company by talking to them, but make sure the person that's working with you, even if they're a student, you definitely want to work with students and things like that. You want to help them with their career, but at the same time, make sure they're a U.S. citizen. That's a hard requirement. Is that anybody touching your systems? Good call out, Daryl, because we had that incident happen where we were working with a U.S. based company, but they had a bunch of interns, and the students were not even U.S. citizens, and they were operating in an ITAR environment.
Yeah, technically what they're looking for is what's called a U.S. person. So that could be a U.S. citizen working for a U.S. company, or it could technically be a green card holder working for a U.S. company, just to clarify that. But yes.
Yep, absolutely. All right, we'll cover audit prep for about 5-6 more minutes. And then, please ask any questions you may have. And, this I'm putting on my hat of, let's say I'm coming to your environment. You've hired us not for implementation or anything like that. We just got to audit you. What are the things that you should be aware of in order to get through this properly, right? So first of all, you should have a very clear understanding of level, what do you want to get audited for? If we have to come in and help you understand what you should be getting audited for, it's a problem, right? You should have a very clear understanding of, hey, I'm level 1 or level 2. And then obviously, if you're level 1, you don't need to be audited. But if you tell us to audit you at level 1, it really gives us an indication that you're not prepared. You did not read the guidance and things like that, right? That's a sign of trouble. We don't want to hear these things, right? During the audit. Obviously, during audit prep and consultation, all of this is fine. But as auditors, we can't consult, right? We can't grade our own homework, is what I like to say. The other thing is, make sure you have documented and you can show your self-assessments that have been signed by a senior official. So you can say, hey, I've got all of these IT things in place, talk to my IT guy or gal and talk to, you know, all of these different people in the company. But what we're supposed to do is make a determination of risk based on assurance you can provide us, which means just paperwork. And the paperwork that is most sufficient is, well, we've been keeping this up to date since, you know, for the last couple of years, or there has been an ongoing investment. That tells us that you care, your leadership cares. You didn't just wake up and decide to do this and put all the paperwork together last minute. We have history to show for it, right? And we can make a good opinion. So it's very important for you to understand what level, and then also that you have, you know, just like you want a signature on your contracts before you get paid, we would want to see that you have your annual security assessments that have been signed, right? And they're not just signed the day before the audit. So very, very important to do that. So
hey, Max, sorry to interrupt you, but I was going to say, you know, your comment earlier about you guys are doing the audit, you can't, you know, tell them how to do things. That's where you could lean on your local NIST MEP, because I mentioned every state has one. We have capability to help you in that area. Sorry to cut you off, Max.
No, I think that's fantastic. Any help you can get from the local MEPs, it's always a good thing. And also, you know, if we think about it right now, nobody can do the audit. So a lot of times we are in the consulting capacity because we're not even able to audit. But when we do start to audit, there's supposed to be a firewall, right? There's supposed to be inspector witness and things like that. Now, here's another thing that you should be aware of. Today, you're writing up all of your paperwork and documentation. We, as the auditors, have a totally different protocol. This is called the NIST 171 Alpha guidance. A stands for alpha, or A stands for assessment, and for short, we just call it alpha. And give me just 1 second. I got to get a drink of water. Okay, so what we're supposed to be doing here is we're supposed to be essentially doing three kinds of activities, right? Like, what is an auditor going to do? They need to be reading documents. We call them examination. Like, show me what you got, you know, just let me read it. That's examining. Then we're supposed to have a conversation. Okay, you got your templates and I see that you wrote it really nicely, but do you understand what this material is saying? That is gauged through an interview. Then the last area, and it's almost like the least important area, is, okay, I'll go check your firewall, right? So as you can see, the first two things are on examination of your written, you know, documents, whatever form they might be in, and then it's conversation, right? If you can't have a good conversation about what you did, why you did it, I'm not going to test you. I'm not going to check your firewalls. I'm not going to even drill into things, because guess what? That's going to cost more money and resources. And the goal of the audit is that it should be easier for me to critique you than to create this entire system, right? So we want to get through the audit very quickly, very efficiently. And we start with examining your documentation, make sure it's thorough. And then we start with interviewing different people. If we can't get past those two areas, it doesn't matter what I see on your systems. It doesn't matter if you got the most advanced firewall in the world, if you got the Microsoft environment configured to the nth degree, and you have all these people watching your monitoring stations. It really doesn't matter if I cannot examine good documentation and I cannot have a good interview session. That just means that the knowledge, whatever is happening on the technical side, is not demonstratable, right? So that's very important for you to understand, because when we're going through our audit, it's very similar to us. We have to be able to say what we do and then demonstrate that through writing. If it's not written, it's not believable, right? And the last area is, you know, we don't have to do all of these things, right? But there is an order, there's a methodology to it. So we can determine which, you know, test objects is what they call it, right? When do we need to talk to you? When do we need to examine? And what kind of testing we need to do if it gets to that, to make sure that the audit itself is cost effective, right? So pay attention to this. This is very important. Kind of give you the, you know, the test to the exams here is really, you know, this kind of methodology is very important. That's what's being enforced on us, and that's what's we are we are expected to conduct. So last slide here, right? We need a self-assessment report for level 1 or level 2, and then what we're going to do is we're gonna have a kind of a binary response. Did you meet it or did you not meet it? Or hey, this doesn't even apply to you, right? Those kinds of things, and of course have evidence to support that. Don't just say this doesn't apply to me, it's not applicable. Tell me why. Explain that out to me. Because I only have very little time as an auditor, and if you just say it's non-applicable, it causes me to drill in more and ask more questions. So you have to have a justification of why it's not applicable. The last two sentence, the last bifurcation is not applicable to us. So this is what we've learned, and then I'll pause here. But we've learned that it's not about just having the right technology. It's about having a full program and really separating who is watching and who's operating, right? Separation of duties, and really we are making sure that everything ties back to our contracts and flow down requirements in order to scope. And then of course the business owners gotta have an understanding. If you're an IT person and you don't have your business leadership on board, financially, but also just they're not listening to you, they're not understanding, it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be so difficult for them to pass the audit that if they would just partner with you, it's not even just about the money. If they're present at the audit and they know a couple of important things like, hey, I got to train my workforce. I got to have the right people. I got to have the right team. I got to separate out these things. I can't cook my books. These kinds of things. That's going to go a long way. A simple conversation with the executives for the auditors go a long way, because they understand it's not just, hey, here's a little bit of money and go away, right? We're not going to do anything different. So that's very important. When we do go through these audits, they are talking to myself as a managing director, but even asking for checks on our investors and who they are. Do they understand what you're going through? Those kinds of things. All right. So we'll pause here for any kind of Q&A that you might have. There's obviously resources available to you. There's lessons that we have built out both by the government. They provide assessment guides, and there's an LMS that's available to you for courses and certifications and things like that. And obviously we will give you all of the contact information for us and TMAC. But Daryl, I'll pass it over to you, sir, to add any clarifications. And then any participant that's on the call, you guys can either type your questions, and if you like, you can even come on the microphone and ask any kind of questions that you may have regarding your business.
I think, in order to add to what you've done, an excellent job, Max. I really thank you for your presentation. Comments that I've learned just myself. First off, this isn't a direct competition between companies that are in the DIBs right now. This is pretty much a country versus country competition here, and us versus significant threats to the U.S. That's who this is. It's basically all hands on deck in the U.S. against potential adversaries. That's the first thing to mention. Second thing to mention is when Max was talking about needing senior leadership, that's more than just in the support of financial and other things. That's in the support of following the rules. Because sometimes even if the senior leader of the company is, assuming he follows the rules, his number 2 or number 3 guy or something like that may think this don't apply to me. But if that auditor, like Max or whomever, audits, and that person, it only takes one person. It could be lower ranks, it could be whatever, could really mess you up when you go for your third-party assessment. From the MEP standpoint, we work with companies to do everything we can to get you there and try to get you to the point where we turn you over to someone like Max, and then you would pass on. My personal goal for Texas is to try to accomplish that on, the first go around. But that means that, we're going to be honest and candid with you and tell you what you need to do. Now, if you do it, great. If you don't do it, then don't be surprised if you have trouble. because we're not making stuff up and making it more difficult for you. We're just trying to tell you pretty much the way it is and what you need to do in order to pass the audit. But NIST MEP is not going to take an active role in the third-party assessment. We may go as far as potentially doing like a mock assessment or whatever to make sure you're ready. But we generally roll up our sleeves and work with people to make things happen. We are not an auditing agency. So I think I ran out of words there, Max. Go ahead.
Well, we got a question coming in, and it is a very fair ask, Jeff, and a reasonable ask. So somebody asked, hey, what does a shared responsibility matrix look like? So here's our thoughts on it. The government, of course, has not issued any templates. So when you don't have any templates, any forms, you can take latitude on building anything that you want, which you end up with like lots of different opinions on this. We're also FedRAMP auditors. We work within the classified space, and the government always follows their previous patterns. So what I recommend is that you build a shared responsibility model off of what the FedRAMP templates are. Now, those templates are really wordy, but you can basically take out all of the stuff that's not applicable, which is based off of another guidance I don't want anybody to read, but I'm going to say it. It's called 853. It's a lot more work, but they use 853 to establish responsibility between the government and a big company like Amazon, right? AWS or Azure. Jeff, that has a very good template, sir. I would start there, because that's going to be the most familiar to the government. And eventually when they catch up, they're going to say, well, we built out these responsibility matrices. Here's what they look like. Let's just kind of copy that method and build one out for CMMC with NIST 171 controls laid out in a similar fashion. Yep, so I would hit that up. And then the other thing is I would add a couple of different columns, different, IT team, management team, and assurance team. So what we like to see is that it's not just a responsibility between you and the cloud, because the cloud is not applicable here, but it's really your different teams, right? If you can add a few columns to it, but use the same format, that is very reasonable. That is a solid approach, and you can back that up because, hey, the government has provided that, and eventually when we catch up to CMMC world, it's going to look very similar. But if you need more, we automate some of this stuff, Jeff. If you have more specific questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Hey, Max, can I add a few things?
Absolutely, sir. Yep.
Okay. This is just the companies that we work with. We've worked with literally probably over 100 companies. But one of the things we do is we do exactly kind of like what Max says, but it's involving internal versus external. There could be an enclave of people where 4 or 5 people have maybe electronic access, or it could even be one person. The smallest company I had, only one person or two had electronic access to the level 2 information. And then, other people may have had part or paper or whatever, he mentioned the physical part of access. So, by clearly defining that, then an auditor like Max or whatever can come in there and he can see what's inbounds and what's out of bounds. Now, when you get into the MSP and an MSSP role, I don't know what you're finding, Max, but roughly on MSPs, on companies I've been working with, maybe 1 out of 10 of them are actually making efforts to try to be level 2 compliant. You might say, so what? Well, the so what is if you're using an MSP that has access to your electronic data and they're not CUI level 2 compliant, yeah, that can work. But what that means is you either have to virtually or you have to physically escort them if they're ever working on those systems. So keep that in mind that, you can't just turn them loose, or you can't just let them remotely access into your system or whatever, or that'll be an automatic failure.
Yep, absolutely. So the time is up. Thank you everyone for asking the questions. We'll continue to do this. This is going to be a series. We want to share our journey as we go through the audit. And if you have any questions, please reach out to myself directly. There's also somebody named Justice. You can absolutely reach out to Daryl as well. But we just want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. And we will send out all of this information, as Julia mentioned, the copies, the recording. You'll have access to everything. You'll have access to the entire journey we go through as we go through the audit ourselves. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. You guys have a wonderful day.